Right, well, the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has arrived in South Africa on the first leg of his three-nation African tour. He is also expected to visit the Democratic Republic of Congo as well as Rwanda. Earlier, the U.S. Secretary laid a wreath at the Hector Petersen Memorial Site, accompanied by Hector's sister that's in Soweto. Right, well, Blinken is scheduled to deliver an important speech in South Africa tomorrow on a U.S. strategy on sub-Saharan Africa. Climate change, trade, health and food insecurity will all be topics of discussion. This is Blinken's second trip to Africa as Secretary of State after visiting Nigeria, Senegal and Kenya in November. All right, then let's get some analysis then on what this visit means for both countries and its significance. We are now joined via Zoom by Professor David Munyai. He's an Associate Professor of International Relations and Political Sciences and the Director of the Center of Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Prof, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for joining us here on SABC News.
Good afternoon.
Prof, let me start here. Let's talk about the importance of Antony Blinken's visit here to South Africa. It seems, in fact, let me say to Africa, it does seem to have some element of ulterior motives on the surface. I read an article pointing to the fact that, you know, the U.S. was rather concerned about what is being termed the Russian influence on the continent, and almost treating Africa again as though, you know, we're some children. I mean, is there an element of that sort of ulterior motive to kind of try and get us away from this influence of Russia, as it's being put?
It is this particular trip is full of contradictions and ambiguity. I think the very first thing is just to highlight the positive elements of the trip. Africa remains an important player, and the United States is critical to South Africa as well as the African continent's own growth. And therefore, I think if you look at trade alone, U.S. is number 3 trading partner and an important global player in terms of Africa's position within multilateral structures, whether you're dealing with the COVID, the health issues, peacekeeping, and quite a host of issues where the continent depends on the United States. In light of the AGOA and a number of initiatives that the United States has been playing. But having said that, you just see a language in Washington where there's this stubborn move by Washington to fail to respect the continent, saying it, I mean, putting it as you have already mentioned, treating the continent as if it's a child. You have to put in line, coming in to stop other players as if the continent does not have its own interests, and it chooses who its friends and friends are.
Yeah, and then let's talk about again what the U.S. might perceive as you know, this friendship, I suppose, with China that we have here in South Africa, and I suppose that would also be then problematic to the U.S. I mean, I suppose our relations with China are pretty decent, and of course there's a sense that at this time, in particular, the U.S.-China relations aren't particularly on solid ground. I'm obviously referring to the recent visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, and we've heard some threats from China where they've been, you know, quite clear about the fact that is actually problematic and that would cause problems between China-US relations. So one wonders, when you look at all of this, if it all comes into play, you know, you don't want to think that everything is about us, but does that have anything to do with this particular visit?
I think the perception in Washington is that whoever Washington chooses to be an enemy for any given moment is automatically everyone else's enemy. I think that's where the problem is. I think with the war in Ukraine, an unnecessary provocative move by the US to get into Taiwan by Pelosi and quite a number of congressional leaders into Taiwan, and numerous moves on Washington in terms of building alliances against China. When it comes to South Africa and the African continent, I think the position is quite clear. South Africa and Africa do not take sides. It's not on the side of China, nor is it on the side of the United States. Yeah. Both South Africa and the African continent have core interests, which is the development of the continent, the increased employment, ensuring that we have both developmental and security issues. We combine both, and bringing in United States as well as Russia, bringing in China, it's critical for Africa's own quest for development. And that's what's central, and that must be respected.
Some analysts are of the view that, the continent, the African continent has been, historically disregarded by the U.S. and that perhaps what is at play at the moment is the U.S. sort of playing some sort of catch-up. I don't know if you agree with that perception or that view that, that has been put out there by some analysts. And I mean, if you do agree with it, the fact that the U.S. is then on this attempt to catch up and, given that they would have been disregarding disregarding the continent, is it too late? Is it too late for the US to then play that catch up?
It's never too late. I think if you see the links between South Africa, the continent, and the US is quite deep. US has a huge African diaspora community. You have some of the most progressive forces within the United States that played a critical role in the struggle against apartheid. Yeah. And at the same time, the US supported apartheid. So there are these contradictions that with each administration, but they have been consistent. And what's worrying for Africa is that the United States looks at Africa through the lenses of security, moving lots of its military base and military hardware without really emphasize the developmental, the building of infrastructure, more on education. And the COVID-19, I mean, it played its role, critical role, positive in the end, but there's always been this vaccine nationalism in the United States where Africa faces this dark hour, US looks the other side. So those are worrying factors that need to be emphasized by our minister as well as all other African leaders as they interact with Americans.
Yeah. Prof. Munyai, Washington also, and it's very clear, wants to, build support for Ukraine in this Russia and Ukraine war. We've been particularly clear, through our minister, Naledi Pandor, about, the stance of South Africa when it comes to Ukraine-Russia relations. Would we change that stance? I do remember Minister Naledi Pandor saying, listen, this is our stance, this is where we stand, and pretty much saying we're actually not picking a side, as you've rightly painted that, we've in most instances we've said we're not actually picking a side. But it does, of course, seem that this is what Washington is indeed trying to do to garner that sort of support for Ukraine. And I mean, why involve us? Why involve South Africa?
There are key issues. As Secretary Blinken arrives in South Africa, another U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, she made this devastating statement the day before yesterday, in which she instructed Africans to only buy food as well as fertilizer from Russia, and warned African countries that if they buy anything else under sanctions, United States will deal with those countries. I mean, this contradicts this visit. And there are also two bills within Congress as we speak. One is a bill which is anti-China companies in Africa, as well as the other one, which is anti-Russia involvement in Africa. And the problem with those bills is that they seem to emphasize this hegemonic language that United States consistently undermines Africa's own agency, Africa's own interest. Yeah. And therefore, I think in this particular meeting, and the major Africa policy that Blinken is going to announce at the University of Pretoria quite soon, we're looking at what kind of new languages, what kind of relationship and the manner in which the United States treats the continent.
I'm interested in this particular word that you use, undermine, and I wonder while you say that, if we'll ever get to a point where Africa as a whole is not undermined by the West, and we've seen situations, and I wonder if that's also a leadership issue. We've seen where we've had leaders who indeed were trying to fight that the fact that our Africa is undermined, that they were made to be the bad person. So will we ever find a situation where we have leaders who are able to take on this issue of being undermined as a continent, and not facing the consequences of that?
I think all depends with Africans themselves. I think the day the continent speak with one voice, unite and integrate, develop and ensure that it protects and it moves and protect its own interests, and concentrating on the interests of its people instead of others from outside the continent, whether the West or East. I think that's the day when the whole international community will start respecting the continent. A need to feed ourselves, the need to protect ourselves in health, as well as the pandemics, and stop this view of Africa as the face of poverty.
Yeah.
I think we are capable of doing that, and we need assistance from strategic partners such as the United States, but that has to be done with respect as equal partners, not views that we get where Africa is just but a way in which a stage to demonstrate the power of the United States in the world. That has to come to an end.
Prof, it's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you very much for giving us your time, sir.
Most welcome.
All right, that is Professor David Munyaide weighing in, of course, on the visit this afternoon, as we are indeed hoping to hear from Antony Blinken in a short while. He is at the Hector Petersen Memorial site where he had been laying wreaths. We understand that in a short while he might be able to address the media, and we'll certainly take you live there for that as and when that does indeed happen.